welcome to the Capital Discussions Road Trip Trade Alerts monthly Q&A call for December 2016. I'm Tom Nunemaker with Dan Harvey, but before we get started, a quick disclosure: the Capital Discussions is not a broker-dealer or an investment advisor. This presentation is for educational purposes only. If you don't know your situation, I have no way of knowing the level of risk is appropriate for you. We're not making any specific trade recommendations. The risk of loss in trading options can be substantial, so please be aware of all of your risks prior to placing any trades. Hypothetical computer simulated trades are believed to be accurately represented. However, actual profit or loss may vary due to market factors such as liquidity, slippage, and commissions. And this is for educational purposes only, as we all know. So with that out of the way, welcome back, Dan. I had to go back to Option View 8.05 because one of the risk graphs on one of the accounts I'm trading didn't look right, so I had to re-enter everything in. But it's stable at least, so I'll play around with it some more, maybe this weekend or next week. But anyway, we're in good shape for showing the positions anyway. So let's see. Should we start with the ES?
Sure, we can do that.
Go through the open trades first.
Yeah, we can do that. It's always great for us to be Option View's beta tester.
Oh yeah, gotta love it. We're on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Let me zoom this out a bit. Okay, so this is our December 30th ES futures option position. And as you can tell, with the 2 standard deviations being about 2 standard deviations above the tent, this one looks like it's going to go out pretty much as a scratch. I don't think there's any plans for this except to do just that. Is there, Dan?
No, there's really nothing. I mean, obviously, anybody that has margin to burn, you can add stuff, you can reverse Harvey, but personally, I don't do that for a structure like this, and I have I don't do it, even before I started doing this for capital discussions. When I would have one like this, I just would leave it alone because the mindset for me on the ES is a bit different from that of the SPX or the RUT when I did the RUT. I'm not looking to make this a complex trade, and I recognize that some of them will break even. A very small number will take a small loss, but the majority of them will make something, and a small number will make a very high yield. And the probability numbers, I think, are in my favor, and so that's basically the way that I approach this, and I think you do too, probably.
Yeah, although I stopped trading ES futures options only because I needed to simplify, because I'm trading so many accounts. I didn't want 2 symbols to worry about with all these accounts. It just doubled all the work.
You're right.
But yeah, when I was trading these, and I mean, look, we're only using option views calculating about 2,000 of margin, so it's not eating up a lot of margin. You might make a few dollars on it, but it should pay for the commissions anyway. So that's that one. We only have 2 more of these guys for the ES. So this one, let's see, let's go T31. That's 15 days before expiration. And again, this one's in pretty good shape. Still some time to go, but we're not too far above the tent yet.
Right. This one we have some time. So for this one, obviously, at some point, another reverse Harvey is coming, simply because the T+0 curve is so flat, basically over a 2 standard deviation range, that we can certainly reverse Harvey and might even roll up 1 or 2 of the shorts. And the nice thing about the ES using span margin, you really don't need to roll up the lower long put if you don't want to, because the incremental increase in margin, I think, is going to be, well, I know it's relatively minimal. So unless you have margin issues, you don't necessarily have to roll up the lower long put. you you still need to keep the t plus 0 and the family of curves relatively flat, but we have lots of time to make a little bit of money on this. And of course, obviously, if we pull back, then the structure becomes a butterfly again, and we make we have a good return then.
Well, and just by example, if, for instance, you just did this short vertical, the margin went up to 4,600, and it lifts this up a little bit, $1.50 times 2, but it's $50 a contract, so it would increase your profit up here at $75, but it didn't increase your margin by that much because, again, the span margin is only about $1,000 less. So it was another 1,000 in margin to do that type of adjustment. So it doesn't really increase it very much, like you said.
So you could do that, or you could simply do a reverse Harvey and roll down the 2150 to 2125 and not do anything on the lower end, and you'll have a similar pattern.
Yep. So that bumped up the margin about 1,200, and you can see this is above 0. So that's the nice thing with span margin.
Right. So the closer we come to expiration. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, is there anything you wanted to say more about that one?
Oh, well, I was just going to say the closer we get to expiration, we can do a reverse Harvey once or twice. It's such a simple adjustment. I don't really view that as adding to the complexity of the structure. And if you wind up making say, $250 or $300, that's still not a bad return. And as long as you leave some area for the butterfly to be the butterfly, if we drop off, to increase your return even more, then I think that's an easy way to approach this without really adding a lot of complexity to the overall structure of the trade.
Right. Okay, we only have one more. Let's see, apply and get this over here. And let's see, let's make this T49. And go back to blue. All right, so here's the February monthly expiration, the February 18th. And again, it's a little bit underwater, but not much. That's by design. And I think, the 2 standard deviations at expiration is already inside the tent, so it's looking like a good candidate for reverse Harvey.
Right, same thing. We can do a reverse Harvey, and we can sell a put vertical. And so we have lots of time on this one. And then the only other one we have is the one that I put on Friday.
Right. That's not an ES, is it?
Yeah, yes, I did put one on an ES.
Oh, I must have missed that in your fills that you gave me. So,
oh, okay.
My bad. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
It'll look like the SPX one, so
it's going to look just like it's going to look just like the SPX one.
So we
didn't have quite the same strikes, but they were very close.
So we can just pull that up just to kind of transition to SPX. So this is the SPX February 28th trade. And, it looks like a classic entry for a road trip. Margins nice and low over here. And T plus 0 is extremely flat, good data. So, yeah, it just needs some time to pass.
Right. And so I have a similar one in my private account. The only difference I did in the private account, I think the strikes were the same, but I had increased the contract size because I trade larger. And the other thing I did was I put on an in-out debit spread right at the time of trade launch, and I paid for about half of that debit spread with an extra put credit spread. And so what I do in this type of approach is I keep track of the cost of the debit spread and the net cost, meaning the cost of the debit spread minus the credit I received for the put credit spread. And if the value of the debit spread drops to the net cost, I just close the debit spread for a break even. But conversely, if the market drops off, the debit spread will also start making money in addition to everything else.
Right. And I guess we can talk about that in-out trade because that's fairly new. But let's go through the open trades first before we get to that.
Right.
Let's see, which one is 7? Oh, that's the one that expired, I think. Yeah, December 30th. Okay, so here's December 30th. This expires in 2 weeks. So the expiration standard deviation is already at the upper edge of the expiration tent. So this one's looking like we got most of the juice unless we have a pretty good pullback. I wouldn't plan on anything at this point, Dan. How about you?
Not right now, no. Not at all.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything to do. I mean, we're going to make a decent return on this.
Yeah, it's looking good.
Now, what I do on some of these, and I certainly do this in my private account and sometimes on the class trade, is I will stick in a good till cancel order to take out part of the butterfly at a good price. I'll monitor the current price for several hours or even an entire day, so I get a feel for what it's trading now. And I'll just put in a good till canceled order above that price, and not infrequently, I'll get that fill.
How far above the current mark price would you put that GTC order?
Well, I'll go like for example. Well, let's see here. I can probably.
Well, for instance, if you had like this fly and we're just trying to close it with a GTC, the market price is 60 cents right now.
It's how much?
60 cents.
Yeah, I would go in for 80 or 90.
Okay.
I currently have an order in for one that is marked at 0.525, although it was marked at 0.65 on Friday, and I have the order in at 80 cents. And I have another one lot spread that is marked at a nickel, and I have it in at 20 cents. So, you have to be realistic about this. But, I mean, if you're filled, then you're filled at better than the current mark, and you reduced your margin, you reduced your risk, and I think that's a reasonable approach, because what often happens is if we did have a pullback, on that very day, you might not be at your computer, or even if you were, then you'd have to work the trade, and maybe you'd get better, Phil, maybe you wouldn't.
Right. And Rudy asked which fly, and there's 2 flies here. You have this one, and you could put a GTC order in for that, or you could do this one, and you probably have a GTC order for each one.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly, Rudy. That's exactly what I do. Sometimes I'll have an order for both of them. And if it closes the whole thing at better than the current mark at a reasonable price, then so much the better. Because remember, as long as our T+0 line is a little bit above the expiration line, we will be losing money as time goes by. That's obviously, I mean, that's, stating the obvious, but it's something we always need to consider. And if we did have a pullback, say, just for example, to the 2243 level, well, I mean, you're going to want to take whatever money, extra that you have at that point, rather than having it go to the expiration line, right?
Right. And, when markets get fast on a pullback like that, sometimes fills get filled that you wouldn't think they would get filled. So it's nice to have that GTC order in place. Right.
So that's just another trick that I think a lot of people probably already employ, but it's just something to consider. And, virtually every trade that we have on, we can, we can break down into a combination of butters and verticals. So once you get the hang of doing this and seeing things as butters and verticals, it's easy.
Okay, so that's that one. Let's switch over to the January 20th. Here's you've kind of condorized this a bit, but it's looking okay.
Yeah, this one's been condorized, and all I'm doing is I'm watching the call credit spread to make sure I don't lose too much, and preferably not lose anything. I'm just going, so my plan here is simply to let this march to the expiration line and get a good return. We're getting nothing from the lower butter, obviously.
Right, and if I zoom out to see the kind of big picture of the trade, so all the stuff down here is really out of play at this point.
Yeah, so anybody who needs any margin, you can just, as time goes by, the shorts on that lower butter will be ridiculously cheap. If you buy one, that's going to increase, or I'm sorry, decrease your margin, substantially.
Right.
So.
And you can see the difference in prices with these options. You could roll even a 2-lot up to here. It's only going to cost you 18 cents times 2 to cut your margin by, 1,500 or something.
Yeah, and that's a very useful trick as well. So, as I've said before, and Tom has said too, we sort of view this as an inventory of trades. Once you've gone beyond the original butterfly structure and you've added a layer of complexity or two, then it becomes like an inventory of trades. And then margin management is very important because you want to have free money available for the next cycle, or possibly to make an adjustment on a longer dated cycle that will require a bit of margin. And if you can free it up cheaply, that's the way to do it.
Yep. Okay, so that's that one. And this isn't fitting on one. If I can scroll this up a little bit. We've got your in. This is the one with an in out. So let's maybe answer a few questions on that. Now here's the current trade.
Yeah.
Zoom back in. This is kind of where we're playing with it right now.
Yeah. Well, I can just in a couple sentences here discuss my rationale for doing this. Obviously, it is immediately apparent that if the market does have a pullback, within the umbrella of the debit spread, you're going to make a lot more money than you would have from the butterfly alone. And so I usually restrict this. As I say, sometimes I will put one of these on at trade launch and then, immediately cut the net price of it in half. But for this one, we have run up so much that, which, by the way, everybody should keep track of how much we have run up. I have a spreadsheet, probably everybody does, that, calculates the percentage above the launch price and also the number of standard deviations that we are away from the short. I have those, calculated in real time on my spreadsheet. But anyway, when we're this far above, you have some choices. You can roll up some short puts. You can do another reverse Harvey. You can layer on a butterfly, but you have to be careful with that. And I guess we can talk about that later, since that was one of the questions that Brian, I believe, asked about. You can layer on a butterfly, but you have to be careful not to compromise the original structure. And then finally, the other thing you can do is to view the possibility that we are going to, have some sort of a pullback within the next 30 days if you think we are really overextended. And we may or may not be. That's obviously, that depends on who you talk to. But the debit spread is a cheap way of doing this, It's a cheap way of adding premium if the market drops off. And if it doesn't drop off, as I mentioned earlier, I keep up with the net cost. It's on the spreadsheet in real time. And, I have the cell, highlighted so that if it hits a certain value, it turns red. And then I simply close it, and I haven't lost anything. It's a break even because obviously the put credit spread will be making money. So it's going to be a break even. And if we're still overextended and if there's enough time, I may simply add another debit spread because, debit spreads are extremely versatile. Now, you don't necessarily have to do the in-out spread, meaning buy one strike in the money or one strike out of the money. I think this is also sometimes called a straddle vertical, meaning you're doing a vertical debit spread, and you are trying to straddle the current price. You can increase the reward to risk ratio a bit. And so you'd want to play around with different strikes. What you want to avoid, though, is losing more than making. You do not want the risk to be significantly greater than the reward. It needs to be as close to 1 to 1 as possible, or even better, to have a slightly greater reward to risk. So that's the way I manage these.
And just the easy way to see if you're going to get a good reward to risk ratio is how far away from the spot price is each one of these strikes. So this one is closer than that one. So and it's bearish. So you're going to have less risk than possible reward. So that looks just eyeballing it about a 2 to 1 on the strikes. But if you put them equidistant above and below, then it's going to be normally about a 1 to 1 ratio. So if you put your long closer to the spot price than the short is, you're going to have a better reward to risk ratio.
Right. And Brian said, and yeah, you're absolutely right, Brian. He said he thinks it's helpful to look at the new layer structure by itself, and you are 100% right on that. Maybe I've never said that before, but whatever layer structure that you're contemplating, and if you're doing this on Thinkorswim or OptionView or One or whatever platform that will give you a risk graph, yeah, be sure to hide the actual position and simply look at the layer itself and see if that looks right to you. See if it looks like it has the potential for profitability. See if it looks like it's going to be easy to manage. And then, I would recommend by all means that you log this on either with a spreadsheet or something and monitor it, because you don't want to lose a lot of money on any layer that you add. In fact, you really don't want to lose anything on a layer.
Well, and the nice thing with these in-out spreads is, it's not plus 100 or minus 100 delta. It's close to 50. So, even if you start moving up, the spread's not losing money very quickly. So, if you did run up, you might lose a couple hundred, but all the way to expiration, you're only risking 772 to make a potential 1,200 plus. But you'll never get here because you'll take this off somewhere. I would guess at least if it's lost half of its value, then it's a really favorable reward to risk ratio.
Well, that's exactly right, and also it doesn't hurt your Greeks. If you do this in tandem with adding 1 or 2 put credit spreads, if you look at your Greeks and your margin, you'll see it's not a major change. And the other thing is that if the market, pulled back substantially, and if you're forced to make some kind of adjustment on the butterfly structure, now the debit spread is really your friend.
So here's just by example, it's essentially an iron condor. So you're selling a credit spread to help pay for the debit spread. And now that max loss is down to 677. And the Greeks, you get improved theta. The delta's not too bad, and your Vega's a little bit negative, but not much.
Right.
So, that's what it looks like just by itself. Anything else for this one, Dan?
No, I think that's about it. And we're just going to just sort of monitor this. And, at some point, since there's still quite a bit of time on this, we might even be able to raise up the line even more with reverse Harvey. But for the time being, this one I think has a really good profit potential, and particularly if we have a pullback. But even if we stay where it is, we have pretty good profit potential, I think.
Yeah, it's still plus 20 delta or theta. So, the line is above. So that's what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this one is our February 17th. Similar structure to the last one. It's a little bit farther below zero over here, but it's still looks good to me.
It's the same principle. And of course, that the expiration line being below zero, that's going to pop right back up, obviously, once you take off the debit spread.
Right. And
so
you shouldn't be
too alarmed over that, because once you take it off at break even or nearly break even, it's going to look the same as it did before, and then you still, you can do the same thing. You can do reverse Harvey. You could add another debit spread at that point. You could layer on a butter, or you can roll up some of the puts.
Right. I think we answered the questions already. If not, let us know. But yes, the debit spread is partially paid for by the put credit spread. And I think we already looked at D, which is the one you just put on the February 28th trade.
Yeah.
Bodan asked if we could talk about the baby butters.
Right, and I also see a question from Thomas requesting to look over the inputs to the trade entry planning tool, and especially the data points taken from Thinkorswim. So when we're done here, you can switch me over.
Sure.
And I can show that, and I guess I could also I can show the spreadsheet that I have for keeping track of things. I'm sure people have better ones, but it's a good example. So yeah, why don't you finish up? So let's finish up with this then.
So I'm not sure what questions, Bodan, you have on the baby butter. Maybe you can elaborate. I know we've talked about it a little in the past. Maybe guidelines for when to put them on, or the widths, or where to get the positioning of it. Do you have any rules of thumb you'd like to pass on?
Well, yeah, and I think this is the same thing that Brian, or something very similar to what Brian asked us about layering in general and baby butters in particular. And so basically, I don't even consider adding a layer until we're at least 1.5% above the launch price of the underlying. And of course, this is a part of the entry tool. And Tom and I set up the entry tool because this is sort of a critical point. This is the point at which the butterfly, in and of itself intrinsically will still make money. But if you go much above that, the butterfly is not going to make any money at all. So this is the point at which you should begin to think about layering on something. And of course, as you'll see from my spreadsheet when I show it, and you may have your own, we are way above that on every single trade except the one that I just now added. So, we obviously needed to have done something. Now, we periodically and justifiably get some criticism that, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a road trip trade. You're just supposed to slap it on and then go on a 60-day road trip and come back and you've made a fortune. Well, wouldn't that be nice? But that's not real life. I mean, we call it the road trip because for the first 20 or 30 days, for one particular cycle that you just now launched, you don't have to do anything. But if you want to make some money on this, as I think we all do, if the market runs way up, you're going to have to do something, or this is not going to make any money either. It's going to be like not like a conventional butterfly, but you're not going to make any money. So that's the rationale. So you have to pick a point at which you begin to do something, and that's at 1.5%. And Norman, I mean 1.5% above the underlying. I mean the SPX. So as you'll see in my spreadsheet, I note the SPX right at the time of launch, and that's the criterion for 1.5% above. So anyway, this is a point at which you have to do something, and you'll see on the graph, of course, that the curves are going to be compressed, and all the other things that we look at, and so we begin the process most simply by doing a reverse Harvey, and I know Tom does the same thing or a similar thing in his private account, but sometimes you need to do something else, and since we don't want to overcomplicate this butterfly structure, personally, I'm basically limited to about 4 things. And that means I'll add another baby butter. I will add a put credit spread, maybe down below the original short strike, or maybe right at the short strike, or I will roll up the short strike. And now I have introduced, adding a debit spread, credit spread combination to possibly increase the premium and get that line above 0. So that's the rationale and the concept behind our thinking. Now, what you do is actually sort of a trader's choice, really. My first preference is by adding premium, and that's going to be a put credit spread or rolling up a short put. Now, sometimes if it doesn't look as if the market is on a tear like it has been, I'll also add a call credit spread, so you'll see a condor type of order with both a put credit spread and a call credit spread. But Tom likes to call the put credit spread his go-to trade or go-to adjustment. And I think it is the easiest, it's simple, and it adds a little bit of margin, but it also brings in money.
Well, it's easy to put on in 10 accounts, too. So.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's really easy to put on. And then the baby butter. Now that's, let's see, before I get into that, Craig, you can track the slope if you want to. It's obviously going to get steeper as time goes by. If you want to do a quick and dirty, you can just look at Thinkorswim and take a screenshot every couple of days and see if you're steepening or flattening. See where the curve is, where the smile curve is, at the money and relative to your upper long put, because that's what's going to be crushed when the volatility comes down. You're going to lose money on your upper long put, especially if you had placed it really close to the money. You don't necessarily actually have to track the skew by the myth, for the road trip trade. And I'm not saying anything negative against all the very smart people on CD who have very sophisticated methods for tracking screw, for tracking the skew. I'm not sure that is really beneficial on a day-to-day basis for the road trip trade, other than in the context of what I mentioned. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I don't look at it too much. I mean, I just know if it's high or low vol, I'm like the price is going to have changed on my butterfly. I don't really pay attention to the skew or honestly the Greeks very much. More the shape of the chart and where the underlying is in relationship to it. And I know you'd also mentioned about the road trip trade where you put it on and forget about it. Well, you can go on a road trip with multiple trades open because the gamma is really low and the T plus zero is generally pretty flat. So you might not go on a 60-day trip and leave it alone, but you can certainly be gone over a long weekend or, a few extra days, and generally there's not too much to worry about.
Right. Well, that's exactly correct. And you may come back or you may log in again, and you may have likely the worst that would have happened would be that you missed an opportunity to layer on a trade. But the structure was designed to be relatively hands-off, in terms of safety. So when I add a layer, I'm simply trying to make more money. I'm not even necessarily doing a trade that any of you would have to take. I'm just trying to make more money in my account. That's I mean, again,
that's the bottom line.
I mean, sometimes I have to remind some of our subscribers that send in a post. This is real money that's being traded, and most importantly, it's my money that's being traded. So I obviously watch this very carefully, and when I add on something, I'm trying to make money. That doesn't mean, though, that you have to do that, especially if you have smaller size. You may just want to leave it alone, and that's the way that the road trip was actually designed.
So it looks like we're getting some questions on the baby butter and the in-outs, maybe the setup or the thought process you go through. Did you want to maybe take the presenter role and just kind of show people what you're looking at or what you're thinking when you put these on?
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Okay.
And let's see here. Ready to share my screen. Okay. So let's see here. I apologize. I didn't have this all ready to go, but it won't take long. So let me go to one of the cycles in which I have not already added something, which might be this one maybe.
And while you're doing that, I just promoted everybody. So if you do want to join us on the conversation instead of chatting, you want to talk, feel free to call in. It's more like at this point, it's more like a trading group, so you can ask your questions.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you, Tom. So let me just, while I have this one up, I'll do the in-out first. So when I put this on, we were about here, which is 2270 maybe. And so I did this at basically a 1-to-1 reward to risk, and you can tell that by the 45-degree angle of the curve here. And so we dropped off a little bit since I put this on, and so we're now sitting under the debit spread curve. And so the reason for putting on something is that I'm going to click on the T plus 47, which is now the blue line here, and which is roughly 15 days prior to expiration. So you can see where we were at 2265. We had a complete and total compression of the curves. They were all overlapping. So there was no money to be made there, in other words. So you can do a reverse Harvey, but then you are risking losing some of the butterfly structure. And by that I mean the fact that if we drop off, you make more money, because this is a bearish leaning butterfly, obviously. So if we drop off, we make more money. Well, the more you raise these curves, the more it starts to look like a condor type of trade or a weirdor type of trade. or a single tent type of condor. So the rationale is to do something to lift up this curve, and we're still going to hope we get a bit of a pullback, and then we'll make a really good return, or at least a decent return. And if we had a fairly strong pullback, we'd make an excellent return. So we haven't really given up the butterfly structure. Again, meaning the appearance of this family of curves where we make more as we approach the short strike. And so I add a put credit spread, and I either, generally I'll put it down here someplace. I forgot on this one what I did. Sometimes I will add it right at the short strike. And the other thing you can do is to do a reverse Harvey and a debit spread at the same time, because remember that a reverse Harvey on the upper long put, basically in essence what you're doing is you're selling a put credit spread. So whichever way that you do it, you want to wind up with a structure that looks something like this. And as Tom mentioned, this is where the skew is not really critical for the road trip style of trade. It is on other types of trades. It is very important on a conventional butterfly type of trade to be very knowledgeable of the skew, but not so much on the road trip trade, and not so much with the SPX, where the volatility smile curve is very smooth. You don't have a lot of humps and bumps in it. But other vehicles and some of the commodities you do. So there it becomes important. So anyway, so that's the in-out spread. And what I do is on the spreadsheet, which I'll show now before I go to the baby butter, is I keep up with where we are, above and below the launch. And I haven't, as you can see, I have not added the 28th February yet, but everything before that, we are way above what the SPX was at trade launch, which is why I've been layering layering positions. So the way I have the spreadsheet here configured, once this sell hits 1.4%, which is 0.1% less than the 1.5 that we use on the entry tool, this will flash green and stay green as long as it's above that. Now, when I add a debit spread, I keep up with the legs, and these are the RTD links that are brought in from Thinkorswim, so this is real time. These are the original cost of the legs, the original cost of the debit spread. I subtract from this value the cost of the premium that I received on the put credit spread, and that becomes this value. And then I format this cell to flash red if it hits this value. That tells me that I need to close that debit spread. And this is obviously what the debit spread is doing now. And as you can see, I added some of these in my private account. Those are the ones that say margin. And that's the way that I keep up with this. And so this number over here, simply shows this as reflected as a percentage of this. So this number is 115% of this. So that's another way of looking at it. And so there's the one that I put on Friday, which is still unchanged. So are there any questions on that then before I go on?
Yeah, Dan, hi.
Oh, hey, Bonan.
Hi, Tom and Dan. Can you show, at least for me, and maybe I'm slow, just the specific prices and option prices of the in and out trade just by itself on option view, as if, let's say, today we were trading, if you had to put one on now?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you like me to do this on the one I'm looking at, or some other cycle?
The one you're looking at, really, I'm primarily interested where you place it, what the deltas are, because I know you talked about the debit spread, but isn't there an accompanying credit spread with it?
There is.
And that's what I'm missing, I believe.
Sure. So I will show that. And but now, once again, the put credit spread that you're adding, that can be placed in basically one of three places. First of all, it can simply be a reverse Harvey, where you're doing a reverse Harvey on the upper long put. So you're selling one of the upper long puts, and you're rolling it down. So that is in effect a put credit spread. The other placement that I commonly use, and I think Tom does too, is to sell a put credit spread with the short strike placed at the same short strike of the butterfly. And then sometimes, depending on how far we are away, how far the market is away, I may actually sell a put credit spread down below the short strike. So those are the three places that I use. So this is the February 17 cycle, as you see.
Right.
And we are currently at 22.58. I'm going to call that 22.60. So I'm going to start looking for the in-out at the 22.70, which is this one, and the 22.50, which is this one. Okay, and we'll look at that just as the trade itself. And so it's going to look like this. So this is actually a better reward to risk than 1-to-1, because up here we're making 1,200, right? And down here we're losing whatever that number is, 754, something like that. So this is actually pretty good. And for Thomas, you can make this wider if you want to. I don't do that because it's going to cost you more. The Greeks are different when they're wider, and it's going to cost you more, and sometimes the reward to risk won't really be what you want. And remember, we're not really trying to make a fortune on this. This is as much a hedge as it is anything else. So anyway, so that's the in-out spread, and then so if we wanted to add a credit spread, let's just say we will add one at the short strike of the butterfly, just for sake of convenience, and that would be reasonable because it has a delta of about 13. So we'll try adding one first. So we'll add one there, and we'll come down here and we'll buy one there. And so as Tom pointed out, you wind up with sort of a condor structure. And see, the nice thing about it is this condor structure basically is going to overlap the butter, so that when you look at them all together, this is going to be in the money-making area of the butter itself, and that's what also makes this an attractive trade.
Is there a reason? I'm sorry. Is there a reason why you picked a 2100 strike to buy against the short credit spread? That last one,
no, just for the sake of demonstration. You can go lower if you want to.
Okay.
If you go to, say, the 2075, you'll get more money, but obviously you have to have the margin for it, which is why I always like to, as you know, to keep some powder dry. So
right.
you'll make more money on this, and you'll have even a better structure. So I would recommend anybody that likes this particular type of adjustment, I would recommend that you kind of play around with these before you actually slap it on. I mean, you will get a good fill, or at least a decent fill. So you want to play around and get the one that you're happy with, not only by itself, like this one, Bodan, but also, as it relates to the overall butterfly. And then
one more question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One final question. Will you sell I believe I've seen in your prior examples that you sold, maybe you'll sell 2 credit spreads?
Yes, sometimes I do that. Yep.
Yeah, depending on your risk tolerance.
Right, on risk tolerance and also the placement of the put credit spread. And here's my thinking on that. And I'm not sure everybody would agree with this, but here is my thinking. Sometimes when I add a 2 lot for the credit spread, I'll usually put the short strike down below the short strike of the butterfly itself. And so I'm not going to be bringing in quite as much, premium, thereby necessitating selling 2 instead of 1. But the difference is that by the time that the market moved down to the short strike, of the butterfly, I am likely, if enough time has passed, I'm likely going to have enough profit that I'm very happy taking the whole thing off.
Right. Is there a certain delta level that you try to go to or contrarily stay away from? I mean, is there a red flag area which says, you have to adjust or take something off, generally speaking?
You mean for the put credit spread that I add?
For the put credit spread that you add, or for this entire in and out structure, if the market starts going to your short strikes, for example, I'm just wondering how you measure your risk, if you're using delta, or basically how you measure your risk.
Right. Well, the only time I use a delta is the delta of the short strike of the put credit spread that I'm adding. I don't want to go over, 15 delta. And
okay.
Usually I like it between, 10 and 12 or 13 at the max. But as far as the Greeks of the debit spread, credit spread combination, the in-out spread combination, I don't really look at the Greeks on that because that tends to be incorporated into the structure of the butterfly itself as you, let me just close this out and go back here and look at, so see this debit spread, this just gets incorporated into the structure of the butter. So there's
right.
really no need to look at the Greeks of this thing because, number one, it's going to plateau out. I mean, this is the debit spread mainly, so it's just going to plateau out. And so when you get in this area, if enough time has gone by, this is what I call the sweet spot. It's the same term that I use for my weir door, the sweet spot of my weir door. It's someplace in this area. If sufficient time has gone by, I'm likely just going to take my money and say, thank you, Mr. Market. So I'm not really concerned about the Greeks of anything, or I should say the deltas of anything down here, because way down here, I'm likely not going to be in this trade.
Thanks, Dan. Well done. Thank you.
Oh, sure. See, Tom, did I get all that?
I think so. Brian just asked, great addition to the road trip trade toolbox. On toss, can't you enter this as a custom condor order instead of 2 separate verticals?
You can, Brian. And the reason that I didn't do this the very first time that I showed this, and let me just kind of backtrack a little bit. I was only sort of kidding when I said this is real money, my money. Yes, it is. It is real money, my money. But I was only kidding in the sense that I whatever trade I make, I try to be cognizant of the subscribers because I know that many of our subscribers are taking similar trades, and I know that even some are taking exact trades. And that's the reason I don't trade larger size in this account. I would love to be trading larger size. I would make a lot more money, but that would ruin the road trip service for capital discussions because the majority of our subscribers, I'm guessing from the comments I've received, don't have that margin. So I'm always very cognizant of our subscribers and what they're thinking. So when I first did this, I did it as two separate trades because I wanted people to be able to see, I see Dan is adding a debit spread, and now Dan's adding a credit spread. I see. So that's the way I did it at first. But in the future, these will probably be Condor type orders. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
And Dan, we did have a question earlier on about could you go over the inputs to the trade, the entry planning tool, especially the data points taken from TOS?
Yes, I will do that. And I think, before we do that, and Tom, I'd like you to help me on this. Let's, since we did have a question from Brian about butters, the baby butters, let's see if I can, and I think on each and every one of these I've added something already, with the exception of the one I put on Friday. That's the only one I haven't added. So let's just sort of pretend that we're setting up that we're sitting up here. I don't know exactly where this would be, but I'm reasonably certain we're up around the 1.5%, area. I can check that in a second. But let's just sort of pretend the market was up here instead of down here. And let's just say then that we had decided that rather than the other adjustments, we're going to add a baby butter. Well, so what you want to do, you have to decide, first of all, what is the expected move of the SPX based on volatility for the life of the trade, not necessarily the expiration date, but for the life of the trade. So in other words, if the expected move was, say, 70 points, and let's say we were at, I'm just going to move this over here. So let's just say we were at 2,300. So for the life of the trade, the length of time you're going to keep it, let's say the expected move based on volatility was, we'll say, plus or minus 70. And, by the way, for those of you who have Thinkorswim, this is easily done by coming over here and looking at these numbers on the Analyze tab. So for the 28th of February, the expected move based on this volatility. Now, this is Thinkorswim's volatility. And Thomas, if you can tell me how to change that very quickly to a light background and change it back, I'll be glad to do it. I have forgotten how to do that. So let me just continue on until you tell me how to do that. So this is Thinkorswim's volatility for this cycle. Now, if you go on to iVolatility, it'll be different. But anyway, it's giving us an expected move of 117, which is a little a little farther than I had guessed. So we'll just round it up and say 2,200. So you'd want to place the butter such that the majority of this area would be covered by the butter. And so what I do is I usually make it a bearish leaning butter, and I usually make it a broken wing butter, but not by much. I may only drop the lower long put by only one strike out, and that's going to cost a little more, but I want this to basically overlap this area, so I want it to look something like that. And I don't think we have the time for me to experiment with this, but you'd have to experiment so that the curve would look something like what I'm outlining here, so that you still have a little room on the upside, that the new butterfly will make you money, but that you also have some room on the downside, certainly up to this point, where you'd have a butterfly structure that would make you some money. And you have to do it at a reasonable price, because remember, if you pay too much for it and the market, continues to zoom up, then like any other adjustment, you're going to have to pick a point at which you close that. If we drop way back, the butterfly that you added will be incorporated into the structure of the original butter, and it'll all be okay. But if it keeps on going, you don't want to lose much money on the new butter. So that's my basic approach. And, for me, it's just a process of trial and error until I find one I like. So I hope that answered the question on the baby butter.
Oh, and Thomas said for, I guess, the toss light dark setting, go to setup in the upper right corner, then application settings, and then look and feel as light.
Yeah, okay. All right.
If you need to, yeah.
So before I do that, were there any questions on the thinking behind adding the baby butter? Did I explain that pretty well without going through the trial and error process for you?
Hey, Dan.
Is that okay? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Hey, Dan, when you ultimately add the baby butter in this February, I don't think this one has yet, you just put this on. Will you, if it's possible, when you send out your messages, which I really appreciate that you do, can you just say adding baby butter? Is that too much to ask?
Not at all.
That might clarify things.
Do you mean you like to see this before my working order, or would you, or simply like something like my working order to add baby butter, something like that?
Yeah, just refer to it, saying adding baby butter, butterfly.
Sure. Make
it. Yeah, I don't want to impose on you because you do a lot of work and you send out a lot of text. But if you just say adding baby butter, and you're great at showing your strikes and your prices, I think I can figure it out. I think most others could too. I can't speak for others, but just say adding baby butter very quickly and easily,
Sure, that is very easy to do, and I will try my best to remember to do that.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks, Dan.
Oh, you bet. So now I'll go to the screen here and go to Setup, upper right corner, application settings, look and feel.
Light. About the color scheme.
Oh, yeah. They've actually, it's been a number of years since I have changed this, and they have done this now differently. This is better than what they had before. So does that help?
Yeah, it's easy to read.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Thomas says much better. Okay, well, all right, so let's see here. now I'm kind of, it's like I'm in a new world now. It's like
Just
a
came
Star
out
Trek.
of a tunnel into the bright light.
I know, this is a Star Trek episode. And so this color is not going to be so hot, but it's, I think we'll still be able to show everything. So, move this up a little bit, and we'll go to the one I just now put on Friday. And so we'll go to the entry tool, which is actually buried under here someplace. Come on. Well, I'll just open up a new one. Okay, and also, by the way, my apologies for screwing this up. This is entirely my fault, not Tom's. When I sent him my request, it was obviously very confusing. So let me just, Tom will eventually fix this. He's been really busy, but he'll eventually fix it. But, here's what I'm trying to do. I noticed that the original 3.5% to 4.5% or whatever we had, or 3.75. This is just wrong. This is too far away from the money. And what I've noticed is that if I get the short strike, even as close as only 3.2% from the SPX, the trade still works well. And you're a little closer to the money, which means you make more money without much additional risk. So, so this will eventually show that the short strike distance will be 3.2% to, and I'm going to say 4%, below the money. Now, if you're really conservative, you'd want to lean closer to the 4%. That may give you some problems on the upside, if the market moves up. But if you think you can make up the difference, if the market has a sustained rally, then you'd want to be more conservative and place a short strike a bit closer to the money. Conversely, if the market tone and volatility seem to be relatively quiescent, you'd want to be closer to the 3.2%. So that's what this is going to eventually look like. And this is the way that I confused Tom, because this should still be 3.5%. And I did not phrase this very well at all when I requested this change from Tom. So he'll eventually get it when he gets some free time. So anyway, so that's where the 3.5% is, and the 1.5% is the 1.5% above. So the one that I put on Friday, which I have not added that yet, did I? Oh, I know. I can go to my launch price on Capital Discussions. That'll tell me what I did, because I haven't added that yet. Okay, so there it is. So the launch price was $22.61.60. Okay. So I launched this right about up here. So what I do is I work my way through the spreadsheet, and so the launch price would have been, I don't know if I can override this now. Can I, Tom?
Yeah, you can. Just type over it.
Okay, 22.61. So this is going to calculate, and let's see, the margin on this wound up being 14,960. So 14,960. So So for the time being, I'm just going to leave this in at the 3.2%, but obviously it's going to be changed eventually. It would be 3.5%. So I'm just going to say 2190. So what I do is I will add a line, and I'll make this one be 2190. So if you're not able to follow my cursor, I just now added 2190 there. So I'm clicking on that, and that is this line. And you'll notice that I chose this number 3.5% to be relatively near the short strike, because this is the money maker after all. This is what makes the money. And then I know that I'm going to want another number up here, 1.5% above. So I'll just go ahead and add that in right now, and I'll make that one 22.95. So once again, I'm over here, if you can see my cursor. And that's going to be this line. So we'll get to that in a second. And then the other line that I'm going to note is this cyan line, because this is the loss at expiration on the right side. And as you can see over here, that's going to be negative 525. So I put in negative 525.
Oh, Dan, on your margin required, you forgot a 0 after the 6.
And no wonder. Yeah, thank you. And no wonder that's off. So this obviously passes, and it passes very well. We could have had, this could have gone up to maybe minus
750.
Yeah, maybe minus 750.
A little bit less than 750. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
740 would have worked. Yep.
So this one could have been more expensive, but it worked out well. So where do I get the 3.5% down? Well, that's this. So that's this line, and I'm going to change the expiration. I'm going to use a 4-day step, and So I'm reading this bottom number, which is in orange, and I'm going to set this up to where the time is roughly 15 days, prior to expiration. So I'm going to leave that at the 11th of February. It's not exactly 15. It doesn't have to be accurate. So watch this number there in the yellow, orange, whatever it is, when I move my mouse back over to the line. And that says 41, I'm going to round it 4135. So that's the number that I plug in here, 4135, and that's an easy pass. And now, while I still have it on the same expiration, I'm going to go to this line 1.5% above. And so I'm still going to read off the yellow-orange number down here. But now this is 1.5% above the current price of the SPX, and I'm going to put in 717.
Oh,
and notice that one.
Oh no, that's right. Sorry.
Yeah. So notice this one did not quite make it. But see, this is actually okay. This is close enough. But what you would have found, if you had selected a short strike, the next one down, this would have failed by quite a bit. This one might have only been 4.5% or less. Now, does that mean that the trade won't work? No. This does not mean that trade would not work. What it does mean is that if the market gets on a tear and you have a sustained rally, you're going to be forced to add a layer and do a reverse Harvey more quickly if you want the trade to make any money. So I hope everybody sees that. So it wouldn't necessarily be a failure, but the closer that this comes to the 5%, the easier that it is for this trade to make money if you have a sustained rally. Now, when we have a mega rally, like we have recently been having, where it's a moonshot, where, it's nearly straight up, whatever you had on there, you're going to have to add a layer, and maybe more than one layer, and maybe more than one reverse Harvey, if you want to make any money. But for most of the time, in what I call a normal market, meaning it backs and fills, these are the numbers that are going to work most of the time. So the next thing you do is to see what this would lose in a short period of time if the market made a major drop. So for that, I have chosen to use a 10-day time frame. And this was not selected mathematically. This was selected empirically, meaning that I've looked at 80 million of these things, and I know that 10 days, if you have a major down move in 10 days, you could easily be getting into trouble. And I wanted to see, what the loss would be at that point, thinking that I might actually reposition the trade if we got hit that badly that quickly. So now I'm going to be reading this cyan colored curve, which is the one I'm outlining over here. And once again, I'm going to go back to the 3.5% down, and that says negative 151. And I know from experience that this is going to fit very nicely. So minus 151, and that one obviously passes. So what we've done so far is we have seen that the trade is a moneymaker if we drop into the tent, and we're happy with that. We've seen that if we drop into the tent very quickly, but still within, say, 10 days, very quickly, we're not going to be seriously hurt, and we can do whatever we need to do at that point, which might simply mean exiting the trade if we drop that far that fast. And now we're going to see if this is making enough theta. So I simply read off 22 and drop that in. And this is making enough theta right at trade launch. And, as everybody knows, as time goes by, the theta will increase. But you want to have a decent theta to delta ratio right at trade launch so that you are generating some theta right away. Okay, we've done this one. Even though it says a fail, this is actually close enough. And now we're looking to see what would happen if we had a cataclysmic drop of the market. And by that I mean maybe not a black swan event, but something like, a 3.5 standard deviation move. What's this going to do to us? Say we had not exited the position, how badly will we be hurt? So for this, I come back over here, and I go back to the same curve that I had before, roughly 15 days before expiration, and I see where this curve becomes roughly confluent with the other members of the curve family, and I read off that yellow-orange number, and that says minus 2250 approximately, minus 2250, and I know that this is not naturally we would not want to lose this, but this is not a devastating number. What would be a devastating number? And that is when you lose, 30%, say 30-40%. So if this number had read minus 4,000. We still get a pass, but that's actually losing too much. It says pass, but I really wouldn't like that setup. I might take it, but I would look at another one before I would take this particular setup. So that's the basic way that we do this, and it seems to be labor intensive, but once you get the hang of this, and once you have a lot of experience, you can do basically what Tom and I do. We eyeball it. You know, we've been doing this a long time, but these give you some reliable, and I emphasize, you know, reliable metrics that you can use to actually be able to state objectively that this is a good-looking butterfly, and if it's a reasonably normal market, we can make some money from this butterfly. And you do the same thing on the ES. The only difference is you don't use the span margin, but you use the margin on the far left of the graph. So in other words, on the ES, say this was a graph of ES instead of SPX, you'd look at this number over here. So that would be your margin.
And Dan, you should put in the short strike in the tool, and then you'll see that nice graphic that Brad and Chris would like. I think it was 2185. I think you had
2185. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to do that.
Yeah, but just let's say it was 2165. Just change the numbers, and then you'll get the nice graphic there.
Yeah, and the reason that you didn't get the pass, the pass ribbon, is because of this guy, but you know, you're so close, you're likely going to make it. It says may work, and that's certainly true, but actually this is actually, I would consider, a very good setup. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I would take that trade.
Yeah.
Tom, is that cousin It?
Hey, Jim. What?
It could be. It could be.
You know, Jim, only you would think of that. You are one twisted soul, my friend.
You should talk to my wife. She'll agree with you.
Oh, me. Good one.
That's funny.
We can always rely on Jim for good wit. He's got a great sense of humor.
It takes away from the boredom of doing this.
Well, not only does Jim have a great sense of humor, about 99% of the time he actually makes sense. The other 1% we have to discount just because he's a good guy all around. But,
well, thank you.
So anyway, I hope that was perhaps a bit long-winded, but I did have some requests, I think, to be a bit long-winded about this, so I hope I answered all the questions.
Rudy asked, you need to fill in the expiration date. You don't have to, but if you click on the expiration date, you'll get a calendar picker, a pop-up, and that's the empty field there, Dan. Yeah, right there.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think this was February
28th.
28th.
Right.
And then if you had passed on that step 4, if you put in a smaller number, maybe, or a bigger number, like 750, I think would have worked, right?
Yeah. I think
then you'll get
so.
the big pass there, the big red one.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so cool, Tom. Tom did all this. I mean, I have this on my spreadsheet, but it looks very boring, compared to Tom's. I mean, this is,
I had to make it a little
this is
fun.
my spreadsheet. Very boring. But Tom has this set up just right. But you can see on mine here, I've got the 3.5%, and this is what you want. And you want up here between 3.2 and 4% down below the money. And I should say, and I'm sure Jim will agree with this, these aren't really hard and fast, and we don't mean to say that this is the only combination that would work. But what we wanted to do was to establish some metrics that in a quote normal market will nearly always work, and will enable you to nearly always, 90% of the time, to make, some money. Now, some cycles we have double digits, and some we don't. But I view that as the nature of trading.
Oh, and on that on the tool, if you go back, when you select a date, it fills in the T+10 and the 15 days expiration, just so you know what days you're looking for on your software. So that's all it's for.
I had never noticed that. So see, yeah, that's a great addition right there. So then you don't have to guess. You just, put it on those dates.
Yep. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Do you, Dan?
I think we may have exhausted everybody, and I hope.
Oh wait, Dot had a question.
Hi, Dot.
When you have a good price for the baby butter, what do you consider a good price?
Okay. Yeah, that is going to depend. Dot, I wish I could give you a really good answer on that, but see, that's going to depend on how wide. Let me go back to this. Let me once again sort of pretend that this is the current market, which it's not. This is, but let's pretend this is. That really sort of depends on how wide you make this, and if you make it a broken wing, which you should, and I would recommend not actually making the lower long leg more than one strike beyond what you would need to have a symmetrical butterfly. That's actually going to depend on your width, which in turn depends on what you think the likelihood that the market might actually move to the expected move range. In other words, like in this particular case I looked up, it gave 117 expected move range. Speaking for myself, I don't really see that move within the period of time between now and February 28th. That's the calculated expected range using Thinkorswim's volatility. But I actually think it will be less than that. So I would be more inclined to, make the butterfly look something like that. And so I really can't give you a good price. What I recommend you do is to set up a couple of these with just a little bit of variation in strikes, and sort of watch the prices, throughout the morning. If you're doing this on your own, if I'm doing it, and if you're following my trades, I will have already been tracking this. But if you're doing this on your own, I'd recommend setting up a couple and watching them, and try to get a feel for a reasonable price for the best fit butterfly that can drop in, and then that's the one you're going to want to take. I wouldn't be paying more than, I'd say, I don't know, $1.50 maybe. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, you don't want to struggle too much by overpaying for it. But yeah, $1.50 is reasonable. Yeah,
because remember, Dot, you might actually have to close this out. So I would recommend that you log that price. So let's just say, for example, you made $1.50. And so let's say it's sitting something like this, and you had hoped that the market would drop back into it, but instead the market now moves up here, and we'll say this was the break even of the baby butter you added. Well, it may or may not drop back into that depending on how much time you have left. So you want to keep up with the price, and you don't want to lose the entire $1.50. But it's very subjective. It's kind of a trader's choice. Jim, I don't know if you're still on. You want to give your 2 cents?
Yeah, Dan, I am. What I do is exactly the same thing you do. It's from experience, and the reason why I really like Thinkorswim, I'll set up, 5 or 10 different butterflies or condors or whatever I'm using to end up adjusting. And I'll take a look at it. And I do exactly what you showed before. I'll end up using the 4-step day graph to take a look at what my P&L will look like, in a week, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks. And what I'm looking for is basically exactly on this graph. And what I'll do is I'll check off and look at the graphs with the different trades. And knowing that, and I use the expression that I know that when we move to the left and we go down, what ends up happening is that Thinkorswim's Greeks don't account for the change in skew. And what happens, 8, maybe 9 out of 10 times, that purple line or that blue line, if we move down, is overstating what my profits would end up being. If we have a very steep put skew and it gets flatter, I know that it's going to be overstated. And basically what I do is I just cycle through them. And it takes me a while, just the way you stated before. I look at one trade and then I look at, is it labor intensive? Yes. Do you end up learning how to end up picking them in terms of what ends up looking the best going down? Yeah, you do over time, okay? You definitely do over time. And, I do pretty much the same thing. That I go through the same process with my trade as you go through your process with your trade.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Jim. And yeah, I think Jim makes a very good point here, as he often does, as he almost always does. But as I said, 99% of the time he does. And his good point, the very good point that I extract from what Jim just now said is that, look, we're all trying to make a buck here, and if there's such a thing as free money, I have not discovered it. And the one thing that I used to tell my students when I was mentoring, I told them lots of things, most of which was BS, but one thing was not BS.
I was the one with the sense of humor.
but one thing, look, if there was, you got to think of it like this. If there was such a thing as a trade that never lost, and you always made good money, and you didn't have to put up much money, and you always won, and you always won big. Look, people would be selling their grandmothers. People would be robbing the Safeway. I mean, people would do anything to get money, to do this. But that is not the way trading works. I mean, even the big boys, even the quants, they don't always get it right. And all you got to do is, you go back to 2008 and to Enron days and to all the other things that, all the other big firms that folded, they don't always get it right. And which is why many of them cheat and do dishonest stuff, because they're not making it either. And so there is no such thing as a free lunch. I think that's one of the bottom lines. So you have to pay for this, and you have to do it the way Jim said, and that is by trial and error and learning and setting up several different combinations and watching them throughout the day, seeing how they move and seeing how the Greeks move. And you will have accomplished two things. Number one, you will have found a good trade that's likely to make you money. And number two, you will have learned a lot. So I would encourage everybody to do what Jim said.
We had one question from Bodan at the end. He said, would you do this baby fly with less than 30 days to expiration?
I generally don't, Bodan. I don't know about Tom or Jim if they add stuff at 30 days. I add stuff, but not flies.
What I like to do, Dan, is that I call it my peel process. With less than 30 days, if my adjustments, I like to be taking parts of the butterfly off, not adding new pieces.
Yeah.
Oh, and we also missed a question from Tom about the 28 Feb SPX entry. You got filled at $1.05, but he couldn't get filled up to 115. So when in these situations, when we can't get close to the price, He's asking if you suggest waiting, like, or paying more, like $1.20 to get in.
Boy, that's kind of a tough one because, I mean, I'm tempted to say wait, and I'm tempted to say, wait until the following day if necessary, because you might want to set up a completely different butterfly. And I think even if you're following my trades in the class, let's say that you decided to wait until the following day. You didn't get filled, and you didn't want to pay $1.25, which I don't blame you. Then wait until the next day. If the market drops off, you will get a good fill. And if the market rallies maybe a little bit, then you just would put on a different butterfly with maybe a 10-point strike differential between the new one and the old one, and you can still follow the class trades even though your strikes are not identical. You can still monitor what we're doing.
And that's pretty much what I did. I went 10 points below yours to use different strikes. Most of them were on the 25 points, and didn't have any problems getting filled at 60 cents on those. So, just change strikes sometimes.
That's a really, really tough question. I get asked that. It's probably even, more challenging. Dana, I don't know if you end up doing this, but many times what I'll end up doing is that I'll wait, like if I need to end up, say, adjusting my deltas higher, I'll wait, okay, because we have so much, we have such a flat T+0 line, we're not in a position where we have to end up making a trade immediately. And I'll end up waiting. What tends to happen is I tend to get very good fills because if I'm buying deltas and I'm going to buy them when the market takes a quick step downward or is on a down day, and then I tend to end up getting a good fill. And then when everybody else tries to get on the trades, it's sometimes difficult if that was just a short little pullback while your trade your order was waiting there, captured that little step backwards, and then if the market continues to grind up, the market can move away from you. And if you didn't end up paying up, okay, the nickel or the dime or the quarter that you might have to, the next day it's $1.50 away from you. And then other times, the next day you get it 75 cents cheaper. So it's really, it's just trader choice. And it becomes experience, and there isn't an easy answer to that question.
Well, I would agree, and remember, everybody, as I'm sure everybody knows this, and Jim is an expert on this, I think. The market makers, when you buy a butterfly and they sell you one from their side, they're not sitting there saying, oh boy, I've got a butterfly now. They're not. I mean, they're just filling strikes.
Yeah, I visited two institutional organizations in New York City yesterday. I'm up in New York visiting family, and I always use this opportunity. They manage inventory. Okay, two things that you need to end up knowing. Number one, when they're filling butterflies, the deltas are small. Their risk is small to end up hedging. So as long as the market isn't moving quickly, they'll tend to end up giving us reasonable flies, prices on our flies or our condors. Number two, we're trading against computers. Now, believe this or not, okay, Dan and my services aren't the very first services that have ever existed where multiple people want to end up putting on the same trade. They end up actually having in their algos to be able to end up looking for this. And if they start seeing, several dozen trades come in, okay, all in small size, going after the same flies, they know that they can squeeze you a little bit, okay? And they'll sit there and they'll wait.
Somebody made a recommendation. Yep.
Somebody made a recommendation. I mean, the thing is, I was speaking to, okay, algo designers who ended up doing this, and they would end up going exactly after, here's the way we end up seeing, okay, when they call us newsletter traders, by the way, when newsletter traders do this, and here's when we know we can end up starting to end up squeezing them. Now, if the market moves in your favor, then they can't squeeze you and they'll give you the price. But if the market is going in their favor, then they can kind of tighten the screws on us a little bit. And so it is a challenge. It definitely is a challenge.
And Bodan had a comment. He was on the CME floor. He said a lot of times the floor market makers will fill your butterfly. They may need one of the strikes that we're offering more than others. And also most of the trades are being traded by the market maker clerks. Interesting.
Yeah. It's a little bit different now because the thing is, I'll tell you that all trades are filled, by algos that are running on computers. What will end up happening is that larger trades will go to the floor, or if there are certain amounts of trades, what will end up happening is that they'll need human approval. But it is the algos that are filling, 99% of our stuff.
Well, yeah, that was my impression, and the algos, I think, mainly are looking for individual strikes that they need.
Yeah, and that is definitely true. I mean, the process that the market makers used to end up going through, strikes that they may end up needing, if they're long delta and you're selling delta, or vice versa, if you're long vol, they're managing inventory. And if they got to end up, let's say, selling some of their Vega because they're too long Vega, and we're selling butterflies that are short Vega, they'll end up putting them in because they're just putting them into basically one massive position and managing risk off of that huge, as they call it, inventory.
And Brian had a good point. Says in his experience, wait a day or two with the longer DTE structure and try and get your price. So that's one thing is, we're trying to get filled so many days to expiration. There's a good chance that the market will pull back and you'll get your price if you're patient.
Brian, that's a great point with days. The longer, when you ask, can I be more patient? You can be more patient if you have more days to expiration. Unfortunately, with the fewer days, if it moves against you, you may not have the luxury of time on your side to end up waiting to hope that it ends up coming back into a more profitable zone for you.
I think that's exactly correct, Jim, and that's one reason why we start out with a relatively wide window in terms of time. 70 to 85. You might not get your fill on day 73, but you might get it on day 71, and even if you got it on day 68, if you got a decent fill and the butterfly structure still looks good, you're gravy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then I see, Tom, we had one other sort of non-related question here from Craig. I think I may have either mentioned or shown, maybe just mentioned my campaign SPY diagonal. Okay, this is completely and totally separate from the road trip trade. And while it is a volatility hedge in the sense that it's a long Vega, I mean, it has been a moneymaker for me. I just do it to make money when we have a low to moderate volatility environment like we're in now. It's a moneymaker. SPY's liquid, and the way that I set it up, I just keep, rolling the front cycle and rolling it, and it adds up to pretty decent money. But at the same time, it is long Vega trade, so it's good if we have a major down move. The back leg of the diagonal makes money very quickly.
Dan,
so I suppose that if sometime I could show that if we had a quick session and all the road trip trade questions were answered quickly, I could show that.
Dan, a little bit different strikes, a little bit more negative delta. Okay, but I know a fund that runs $4 billion on that trade. They buy the S&P and they hedge it with a very similar structure to the one that you showed me before.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it works.
Yeah.
Well, great. We're coming up on 2 hours, I think. So probably need to wrap it up. But really good session. So thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate it. And And if we don't talk to you, the holidays are coming up, so Merry Christmas if you're celebrating that, and have a good slide into the new year, as the Germans say. Gute Rutsch.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays. And Jim, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan. Merry Christmas to everybody who celebrates, and those who don't, enjoy the movie and the Chinese food that day.
All right.
Exactly.
Take care,
Thanks,
guys. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.